Welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Januszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. Already getting ready for summer. It's
Well, we've already experienced it. I mean, we had 2 or 3 days last week in the 90s, including, I think, the second warmest day ever recorded in April on Saturday. It was like 95 degrees. And, I'm back sweatshirt on again today because it's, 60 or whatever. But hey, it's New England. And obviously, we've fared a lot better than a lot of other places in the country over the last several months. So just
absolutely. And of course, as Mark Twain famously said, if you don't like the weather in New England, wait 5 minutes, it'll change.
Yeah, there's one ray of sunshine out there through the clouds. No, I'm just kidding.
So we have a special guest today, a return guest, Dr. Vasanth, and I'm going to try not to butcher his last name, Kainkaryam. How'd I do?
You got it.
All right. The doctor has a unique kind of practice. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what sets your practice apart?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me again. It's always fun to come back and share what's going on and to hear from both of you. So I have a very different practice model. It's a model called direct primary care, and I can't take full credit for the model because it's a model that's been in existence for quite a while. But those of us who practice in this model basically take it and make it our own. So in my particular practice, we have a monthly membership-based practice model financially. So my patients pay a monthly subscription fee, kind of like a gym membership or an Amazon Prime. And that gives them access to the consultation visits with me, gives them access to advanced cardiometabolic lab testing. It gives them access to health coaching. And so we've added on more and more value to the membership as things progress. But the idea is keep it simple. Think of the old school doc from 70 years ago in a modern, way of interacting, whether it's through texting or emails, but also financially just a flat membership fee. And so it's really great, and we have a lot of fun. And background for me is I'm triple board certified, internal medicine, pediatrics, and obesity medicine. So I tell people this practice is really, I'm an allopathically trained doctor that incorporates elements of functional, integrative, precision, and lifestyle medicine into delivering a care plan for my patients.
Fantastic. And since the last time you were on, you've added quite a bit to your practice. I mean, I've seen, health coaching, estheticians. You've got a whole lot going on that you're not going to find in most doctors' offices.
Well, I think the issue I have with most doctors' offices is that they are designed to keep they're designed in a sick model, right? So, for example, you'll have a doctor's office where the primary care doc is surrounded by specialists, or they're part of a group with specialists. So what does that do? That basically says you come here, and therefore, because I've got relationships with all these specialists, I'm going to keep referring you out to all these specialists, right? So it's a model that's not prevention. So the idea is, well, what if we flip that around? And what if we say, let's bring in wellness resources together? So we have a clinical hypnotherapist, a massage therapist, an esthetician. We have our own skincare line. We do health coaching. We're going to be doing personal training, obesity medicine. So everything that someone wants from a health, wellness, self-care, prevention. What if your primary care practice was surrounded by those services as opposed to being surrounded by subspecialists? What does that do to the patient, and can it keep them healthier? That is what this is about.
I love that. It's much more about healthcare rather than sick care.
Totally, right. And when someone walks in, they'll see I've got, doTERRA essential oils. We've got, and so the things that people want now, all of a sudden, when they're part of their primary care practice and their doctor has vetted it and they talk to them about it and we have these conversations, all of a sudden it becomes more real, and your doctor becomes your access to your health and wellness services.
Yeah, I would imagine too that when you're dealing with most people on the first base, or when people are just talking about you personally, the thought of going to see somebody and talking about yourself and wellness and getting some tips as far as how to start down that road to avoid going to the doctor, which most people don't like to do in the first place. And therefore, I'd imagine there's a lot of people out there that still don't go until they have an emergency. It's just a wonderful approach. And obviously the word is getting out there because, as Eric said, as it shows, your practice is growing a lot. But the approach there where you just come in for an initial consultation and start you down the road. And I imagine that once people talk to you, it's pretty easy for them to get a lot more involved with, using you for what you're doing. And obviously the simplicity approach where they just come in and you have all the different areas that people might want to tap into, whether it's wellness or different other things that they can do. It's just a great approach. So kudos on the growth. And I can just imagine that people would much rather deal with you in the first place to talk about that and how to be healthy, as opposed to, doc, this is wrong, but I hope it's not, type thing.
Yeah, and I think I think people are also tired of being sold to, right? I mean, you sort of have all these commercials and ads and everything, and when you come for the initial consultation, I don't convince anyone that my practice is right for them, right? They have to make that decision. And so for me, I just have a conversation. I get to know them, they get to know me, and I say, here's what we're about, here's what we do. You want to join? Cool, let's talk. You don't want to join? We had a great conversation, and that's cool too. So, it's, for me, there's a lot about empowering people to have choice, right? And as a patient, you should have the choice to who your doctor is. And as a doctor, I should have the choice to say, this is how I wish to practice medicine. And so that choice is very powerful here.
Yeah, and I think what's so important that you're doing is that focus on preventative medicine. It is so much easier to stay healthy than it is to get healthy once something goes wrong. And I think people are starting to realize, because, obviously we've all just gone through COVID, and everything they kept saying about COVID was, well, if you have an underlying condition, it's going to be so much worse. And people started realizing that obesity is an underlying condition. Just, be not exercising and being in poor health is that underlying condition.
Yeah, and with COVID, what's interesting, right, because we initially were not understanding what the risks are as they came to light, it pushed a lot more people to think of, well, what can I do to keep myself healthier, right? Are there certain supplements I should think about? Are there certain physical activities I should think about? So I think it really shook society in a large way. But there's still a lot of simple things that people aren't doing, right? So if we look at cancer screening statistics, a recent article came out that we're still not back in pre-COVID cancer screening levels. So we have still fell behind from a preventive standpoint from COVID that we haven't caught up. So I think there's certain things that have made progress, but there's a lot of other things that people have just lost the routine of doing. And like you said, right, it was easier to do them while you were doing them, but once you've stopped, it's harder to go back to.
Exactly. So, what are some of those preventative things that people should be doing that we're not back up to speed on?
Well, the article that recently came about was a big push in terms of colorectal cancer, breast cancer, and cervical cancer screening, right? So, getting those three done, we're still quite behind. But there's a lot of things that we just don't even talk about as much because they just come lower on the priority list. So things like lung cancer screening, if you've ever smoked in the past 15 years, and you should really think about getting that done. Abdominal aortic aneurysm screening. So there's a whole bunch of those that sort of, as you go through the checklist of screenings, oh, your 7 minutes is up. So like, we don't really have time to talk about all these other things. So we're just going to let them go. But, they're important. And I think, educating people on what is available to them is important. So I try to do that a lot in social media posts as well, just to say, look, like, you might not be my patient, but me as a conduit of sharing information, at least you're aware and you can talk to your own doctor about it.
Yeah, that's something you've done very well about getting information out, not just through social media, but of course you did a TED Talk, and now you've just written a book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I wrote the book actually December 24th, 2020. So the book was written in one day, as a way of me sort of venting my frustrations for the year as I was sort of going through it, and inspired by my daughter who loves to write. So the premise of the book is she's looking at the year writing in her journal because she's a big journaler, and she was like, well, this whole world looks terrible, because she's recounting all the bad things that happened in 2020. And I give her a pair of magical glasses, and she wears it and she looks at the whole world again, and she sees all the good things that came out of it. And so at the end, the punchline is, well, she's like, are these glasses magical? And I said, well, they are, because they contain a power called perspective. And when you look at things through a different lens, you will see totally different events playing out. So part of that, I wrote it initially for kids, and I had a bunch of people who read it. They were like, adults need to read this. So it was it's really interesting. So I finally published it in December. I self-published it just because I wanted full control over it, and so. But it's now it's available in a lot of independent bookstores. You can get it on Amazon. I'll be doing a bunch of book readings throughout the summer and the fall. So I'm excited. I think I've got my second book mostly written. The first one is inspired by my older daughter, so my second one's inspired by my second daughter, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. What's the title of the first book?
The first book is called To See the World, A Rose-Colored Perspective.
Excellent. And I think that's, it's sort of a theme of what you do, is changing your perspective, because you change the way your practice works from a traditional doctor's practice. Your focus on preventive health is a change in perspective, this book. So that does seem to guide a lot of what you do.
I looked back the other day, and as I sort of self-reflect on who I am in my life, I looked at my high school superlatives, and I got 4 high school superlatives, and it's funny because I have to look at them, and I'm like, wow, like you're shaped so early on. And so those 4 were most likely to be president, class leader, most likely to lead a protest, and giggliest. And so it's funny, right? Because I'm known to like laugh all the time. But if I look at the first 3, it's very much a person who is about changing and not afraid to say, well, this isn't right. Let's do something about it. And then let's create a flock and let's all head in a direction together. So I think part of it is just, it's just who I am. And I think, sometimes we try to change our personalities, and we're like, and then you come to a point probably like in your late 30s where you're like, you know what? This is just what I do, and I accept who I am, and I'm going to do it.
No, I love that. Perspective is such a powerful word, because it's just basically the way that you look at things. And with what we have been bombarded with, especially through social media for the last 20 years or so, even when I was growing up with just 3 newspapers and the nightly news, I mean, it was always negative, negative, negative. And the positive things get squashed. And the bottom line is that there are other things going on. You can take a positive approach to work on yourself, and so on and so forth. So you being out there, being maybe radical, starting a movement, and so on and so forth, just to get your voice heard out there is so important. And the more that people can latch on to that, perspective is a really, really powerful thing. And I'm sure that when people read your book, or they listen to you, or they sit down with you, it can influence them to just change their minds, because basically that's all it is. It's just the way that you think, and you have a different approach to things. And most people probably say, wow, that's a whole lot better than what I've heard of, what's going on, and so on and so forth. I think I might want a piece of that, or at least I want to learn more, and maybe I'll tell somebody else about it.
One thing I learned, and I think I'm also continuing to learn this as a parent, is instead of asking the question why, ask the question, well, why not? Right? I think because a person who's coming with you is coming with an idea or a thought. And so instead of sort of questioning the validity of that thought, put yourself in their shoes and say, well, why not do this? Right? And find as many reasons to say yes as possible. Right? And so it's when you think of things that way, you begin to reframe everything that you see, and sort of that whole of the ego piece of it, or this is me, kind of goes away to the side, and you're like, well, this is not about me, it's about the idea, the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's big. I mean, I've always talked about, needing to say why not more often rather than questioning why. And in fact, I use an analogy from the old Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. When people ask me, well, how did you do this? It's like, well, you know how Roadrunner would stop running, Coyote would run off the side of a cliff, but he wouldn't fall. He would keep running until he looked down. And then
Yes.
when he would look down, he would suddenly realize there's nothing there, and then he would fall. So it's, they just don't look down, you know. But it is very important that you keep pushing boundaries, and so many people sit in their comfort zone, and all of the achievement or everything that they can change is outside that comfort zone. And it's great that you look at it that way.
I think once again, right? I think sometimes we come to a point where we say, that's just who we are, and I think that's just how I've always looked at things. I've always been someone who's like, well, this can be done another way. Let's just go do it, right? And I think oftentimes you're building the plane while you're flying it, and yeah, is that anxiety provoking? Absolutely. I mean, do you lose stress over, you do, but then you come to a point where you're like, you know what, like, I wouldn't be happy if I didn't do this. So, you figure out who you are and what drives you, and then you just keep doing it.
Absolutely. There's an old saying, on people's deathbed, very few people regret what they did. Most people regret what they didn't do.
Yeah.
So yeah, you keep moving forward, and you're getting the word out to create a healthier person, a healthier planet, essentially. How were you introduced in the first place to the model that you're using for your practice?
Completely by accident. It was years ago. Hartford Healthcare was partnering with a healthcare startup company called Iora Health, and they were creating an employer-based direct primary care practice to take care of employees of Hartford Healthcare. And I didn't know any of that. So one day, at that time, the chief operations officer, I had gotten to know the leadership of Hartford Healthcare very well, became very close. I'd gone to conferences with them, totally intimidated by everyone there, because I'm like, I'm just a new guy. I don't know what I'm doing. But this is 2 years out into it, where the chief operations officer pulled me aside one day saying, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, crap, I'm getting fired. I did something wrong. And then, and she's like, we're building this new thing, and I think you'd be great. And I was like, okay, like, that's interesting. I mean, I wasn't really looking for anything. And then like 8 interviews later, I found myself in a room with, Harvard med grads, Stanford MBAs, and all these brilliant healthcare leaders, and became a part of this team building this direct primary care practice. So I've built a practice from scratch before, and had to challenge, and Iora Health, as many of you may know, was, bought by One Medical, and One Medical is now bought by Amazon. So it's really interesting for me to see that the people I worked with, and I still keep in touch with, and, who are fantastic healthcare leaders, are doing national things. So that was my, little intro to say, well, wait a minute, this, everything that we think of, like, hey, you know what, why can't a doctor go, work out with a patient in the gym and do their medical visit at the same time? Who says you can't? So I had to question myself to say, why are all these boundaries there, and what happens if I remove them? And it's really quite magical, right? I mean, there's certain boundaries, I'm sure, for safety and stuff. Yes, you got to have certain things, but like, of course, you can go for a walk with your patient. It's good for you. It's good for them. Like, why not?
Yeah, and I mean, what does this say about direct primary care, that a large healthcare organization was looking at this to take care of their own employees? So, I mean, that gives you an idea of the power that model has. And of course, the fact that Amazon is trying to roll out things like this all over.
Well, let me tell you something that a lot of people don't know about, right? So direct primary care is proven to save large companies money, keep their employees healthier. It is a known fact. The Society of Actuaries did a huge study about 2 to 3 years ago, And it's not just Amazon. Boeing is doing direct primary care with, Johns Hopkins opened up an employee-based direct primary care practice. We just contracted with a national employer, and they're offering DPC for their employees across the entire country. So, there are larger businesses who are savvy, and actually, and even insurance companies. So, some friends of mine in Maine started an insurance plan that is insurance, but part of that plan is your primary care doctors are direct primary care practices. So I think 12 or 14 practices in Maine are part of this network. So those who are forward thinking have begun to see that this is really good. Now, the downside with direct primary care in many ways is very doctor dependent. Those of us who do this, our practices become an extension of who we are, right? So when you become to corporatize a lot of it stuff, it changes the feel again. So it depends on how much you want to grow and how big you want to be, right? Do you want to, do you want to be small, nimble, and hey, I want to make a decision today and I'm done? Or do you want to have corporate layers you've got to go through? Or do you want venture capital funding that you've got to answer to a board? I have no funding. I funded my practice myself by working 3 jobs. And so, I have control. So much of it depends on the doctor, right? And then once you've done your piece, you have to bring in the other people. So I think that is the challenge to the success of direct primary care, is that you got to have your heart in the right place.
Absolutely. And I think what you're describing, though, is a problem with healthcare in general, because so many practices are run by, oh, they've got to get X number of patients in a day, that, they've got to hit this number from either the board or the insurance company that's paying them. So there's a lot of layers that hold doctors back in traditional healthcare as well. And hopefully we can avoid that problem with direct primary care and get back to something where the patient is dealing with the doctor, and it's the doctor that's making the healthcare decision with the patient rather than a cost benefit analysis.
It's an interesting question, because I think it all goes back to the foundation, right? What is the foundation built on? And healthcare, being a capitalist country, it's the foundation in the healthcare system is financial, right? I mean, it's, and yes, as a business, do I have to look at my financials? Absolutely, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, like, you don't have to make millions. Like, you figure out, what we do is really simple. We say, how much do I want to make? Great. Now, what's my overhead going to look like? Cool. How many patients do I want to take care of? Now, and then, so to take care of this many patients, make this much money, what's the monthly membership got to be? Simple, right? So we actually kind of work backwards, because we work the other way, so that you're not incentivized to keep doing more to make more. You begin to do what you want to do, so that everything is guided. Even aesthetics, like, I do it because I like it. It's fun. And I think, and people initially were like, well, why are you doing aesthetics? I was like, well, look, same concept. Perception influences reality. You talk to our hypnotherapist, right? Hypnosis, clinical hypnosis, is about perception. The way we see the world, the way we see ourselves, we physiologically react to that, and that becomes your reality. So if you change your perception, you change your reality, and the way in which you engage with the world changes again. And so that same person who has had multiple health issues, a little bit of Botox, their confidence changes, they're happier, their mood is better, and now they're willing to now go walk 3 miles a day because they feel better about themselves, right? So a lot of this is really sort of delving into that humanness. And so the traditional models are built financially. You're not built on relationships or meaning in life, things that are just a higher level of satisfaction than just money.
Absolutely. And this is actually something that we've talked about with a number of business owners. It's how small businesses stay agile, not just in healthcare, but in other industries as well.
You have to have, you got to be nimble and be quick, right? So in our practice, we come together as a team, we make a decision, and you have to listen to your team. That is a key piece, right? Your team will tell you the answer, You just have to be willing to implement it if it's acceptable, if it's reasonable, right? So you have to be willing to listen, and then quick implementation, right? Rapid cycle PDSAs of like, let's see what happens, look at the outcomes. Are we where we want to be? Now let's cycle it again, right? And so oftentimes the inertia for PDSA cycles is so slow in organizations that like then you get frustrated. Employees get frustrated because now their idea isn't being listened to and it didn't change their workflow. So that, I think, to me is fun, but it's also stressful because there's some days where my team is like, wait, what? We did this way yesterday. Today we're doing it a whole different way. I'm like, yes, we're doing it a whole different way. Get on board. And so, I think you got to pick who you're like. If you like change, I tell everyone, change is the only constant, right? So if you are going to be resisting change, you're going to struggle no matter where you are in the world, right? That's the one thing we've learned in the past few years. But if you embrace change and you're always figuring out, well, not why, but how, then we begin to have a different conversation.
Yeah, I think it's great the way you've done this. And it is, I mean, as we're talking, there's a couple of themes in perception, perspective, change, adapt. That's basically what it all comes down to, is find a better way to live, to take care of your health. And people really do need to do this rather than, well, I'm not feeling well. I'll see my doctor if it gets worse. It's like, no, find a way to keep feeling well before that happens. Right. We are just about at the end of our time. So if somebody wants to find out more about your practice or set up an appointment with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so all of our, what we do offer is initially you can do a 15-minute virtual meet and greet. So you can sign up right on our website, www.elementsmd.com. And we can do a 15-minute, just say, hey, like, what are you looking for? What are you interested in? And then if someone wants to join, they click the join button, they go through registration and enrollment and membership, but we don't activate your membership till we've met. Then we do our intake visit, which is about an hour of just getting to know each other to say, tell people it's like a speed date with your doctor. So we go through some pretty deep questions. But it's really about saying, like, are we good for each other? And at the end of it, if we are, then we flip the switch and then you become officially my patient and we begin to build out, your wellness plan.
Fantastic. Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
No, I love the words, why not? I mean, we always talk about finding your why personally and so on and so forth and just going with it. And, I see what you're doing more as being a companion and a coach to the people that you're dealing with, as opposed to being a doctor to fix things when things go wrong. The bottom line is that everybody has the ability to change. It's just very, 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 very deep in a lot of people out there. And if you're just letting that little spark for them to kind of explore themselves and do that, that's fantastic. So it's great that you're doing what you're doing. And, I hope that a whole lot more people understand what this is and, what's going on. Because obviously, as you said, it's been around for a while, but a lot of people just aren't aware. So it's just fantastic what you're doing. And it's great to see your growth over the last year or so since we last had you on. And we're looking for more great stories the next time we have you on.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could come back. I think for me, the big takeaway is the fact that, again, you're looking to change perspectives. And just because this is how something has always been done doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. And you're open to looking at new possibilities and new ways. And I think we really do need to embrace that. So glad you could come back on.
Thank you both for having me.
You've been listening to The Success Showcase. You can catch every episode of The Success Showcase at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.